Welcome, Lumineers and fans of the happiest card game on earth. My name's John T. You've just been put in the inkwell. Today, I want to talk to you about budget formats. A budget format in a card game is, well, pretty much does what it says on the tin. It is a format of how to play the game where budget is a major concern. This could take the form of starter deck only tournaments, or something like a slow grow league. We currently have one running at our store where you start with a pre-constructed commander deck, and then each month you can put $10 worth of new cards in. Or it could be a whole format that reduces the card pool with costs of single cards in mind. And that's mostly what we're going to be talking about today. I wish to caveat this with the fact that I am not saying that I have come up with any of this. I'm not claiming any sort of invention or ownership to anything here. I'm purely documenting it. Alternate formats for card games are their best when they come organically from the player base. Commander in Magic, for instance, is arguably the largest format for the game, and it came out as a fan-based version. But no one person is responsible for this. These formats do and should come around organically for everyone to enjoy. With that being said, there's a few different versions of this flying around for Lorcana now, and I'm going to tell you about the one that I think is best. But again, I'm not saying this is how we should do it. I'm purely saying that this is how I've been enjoying doing it. First of all, I think the name Poorcana is incredible. It's a great play on words. It tells you exactly what you need to know. I don't think we actually know who came up with it originally. Eric from the Gamer will tell you it was him, but he's a liar and a fiend. I've also heard the term Lorcommons and Street Rat go around, which again are all fine. I have heard some people say they don't like Poorcana because of the connotations, but I think it's pretty obvious nobody's actually making light of genuine poverty issues. It's just a play on words. It's no real different, in my opinion, to Magic's Commons only format, which is called Pauper, and I think it fits perfectly. There's a few different versions going around now. One is just using common cards, one is using commons and uncommons, and then one uses commons, uncommons, and up to 5 single copies of rares, putting it in line with the starter deck power level. They all probably have their strengths and weaknesses, but for me, commons and uncommons is the way forward at the moment, purely because it gives you a good middle ground between available card pool and price point. I think it's probably a little bit too early in Lorcana's life to be really talking about other formats. I'm still having an absolute blast playing the core game in 1v1 or in multiplayer, but I do think it's worth shedding light on this one due to just how scarce the product really is. Outside of scalped prices on the second-hand market, boxed product has pretty much disappeared from the shelves. But places like TCG Player, or bigger stores like we have 401 Games here in Canada, or even your local game stores perhaps, are selling singles. And a lot of commons and uncommons are running you, a buck for the playset perhaps. There are some outliers. Cards like Flynn Rider is still a few dollars just because he's a very playable uncommon. But for the most part, a deck of 60 cards using commons and uncommons is going to run you about $30 to $40 in single prices. I think that's a perfectly acceptable amount of money to pay to play a card game. It's about the price that people are charging for starter decks with the booster pack ripped out. And I would argue that some of the decks that you can build are more synergistic than the starter decks and will probably give you a more fun time because the deck is really trying to do something. I've had a lot of fun playing with Poorcana using commons and uncommons. I've been able to make a few decks out of the bulk cards that I have, and it's a really great way to introduce somebody new to the game. But also the lower power level means a lot of stuff is relatively balanced. I would argue that Emerald and Amethyst both have the best pool of cards at uncommon rarity, but I would argue that every colour has a couple of staples from regular constructed that you can find in common and uncommon to play in this format. Some cards you might not even realise are that low rarity just because of how prevalent they are in decks. Things like Dragonfire, the Maleficent that lets you draw, or even Friends on the Other Side. I think currently right now Amber has the weakest card pool to pull from. That colour really does rely on some of its big hitters like the Stitches or Rapunzel, but it's still good for some early game beefy questers. I think the best way to show you this is to show you a couple of deck builds that I've done that fit this format. The first of which I've actually played with and have a lot of fun doing so. The second of I have just made for this video, honestly, but it gives you an idea of the sort of decks you can build using the limitation of only taking commons and uncommons. Anyway, let's take a look. The first deck is one that I've nicknamed Mossy Metal. It's Emerald and Steel. It's all about board control and sticky questers. In the 1-drop slot, we have the Duke of Wesselton and Captain Hook as some early board presence, and Fire the Cannons, a great 1-drop that's just dealing 2 damage to a lot of early issues in the game. And a couple of copies of Simba, Future King for some filtering. 2 drops, we have a couple of Beast Mirror. Your hand is very often going to be empty with this deck, so a little bit of draw there really helps. We only have a single 2-drop character, but what a character. Flynn Rider is arguably the best uncommon in the game. You'll probably hear me say that about 5 or 6 different uncommons in this video though. But exactly what Emerald wants to do, just quest out and make it difficult to get rid of him. In a similar vein, in our 3 slot, we have Jasper, a very underrated uncommon that is starting to see a lot more play, and Peter Pan, one of the weaker of the evasives, but fits the slot well, and again is just there to quest and be difficult to get rid of. Kristoff is our 3/3 body for 2 lore, filling out the characters in the 3-drop slot. Also in our 3-drop slot is Smash and Mother's Knows Best to give us some really chunky board removal. Our 4 slot is just Tinkerbell, again an evasive quester, who's also able to give something like your Captain Hook evasive to deal with anything pesky on the other side of the board. And then the top of the curve in this deck is our 5 slot, giving us Mad Hatter, a fantastic quester, Beast, a solid quester who can also deal with any pesky items, Cerberus, a big hitter who is pseudo removal in this, and then Simba, a relatively inoffensive top end that's going to quest or deal with the board. Your top end of this deck is only 5, which is good because the card draw is pretty few and far between, having just Beast's Mirror or Mad Hatter being challenged into gaining you cards. But I would recommend inking up to 6 if you can afford it, because the 3 slot is very full in this deck and 6 ink will be allowing you to play any 2 of them. But for the most part, you're going to want to get your emerald stuff down on the table to stick and then use your steel package to deal with whatever your opponent is doing. This is the one I've been playing the most in this format and I've been having an absolute blast. It doesn't feel far off a proper constructed deck, honestly. The other one I threw together is called Baby Rushers, and it takes advantage of Yellow's 2 lore questers and Amethyst board control and card advantage package. And 1-drop is just little old Pascal and a couple of copies of Befuddle just to get rid of some early threats. You could run Stitch, New Dog or Archimedes here if you really want to flesh out the early game, but honestly these games do play a little slower and your 2-drop slots are fine to get stuff onto the board. Those are LeFou. You can pretty much ignore his ability, but he is just a 2 lore quester. And Simba, a great common that's seeing a lot of playing constructed and does the exact same job here, just comes down and protects your questers from your opponents. Also Be Our Guest we can use to dig, because we're running a few less characters in this deck. You can use Be Our Guest to go digging for them. And 2 copies of Ursula Cauldron, again just helping you filter the deck out a little bit and find some of your more impactful cards. Our 3 costed slot is where this deck shines. Mickey Mouse is a great 2 lore quester. Elsa is going to let you exert stuff on your opponent's board, which plays really nicely with Rafiki in the 3 slot as well. A great sort of pseudo removal on a body. And also Maleficent there, giving you card draw. It's also almost perfect for her to sing Friends on the other side next turn to let you draw 2. Our 4 costed slot is arguably where this deck really suffers at the moment. We have Ariel on human legs, a perfectly acceptable body that quests for 2, although she's unable to sing the 2 songs that are in this deck. Cinderella, a 2/5 with 2 lore who can sing the songs. You'll find yourself very rarely using A Wonderful Dream, but just a 5 on the butt for 2 lore is a really solid uncommon. And Jetsam, not with his brother Flotsam because he is rare, but just on his own, he's just a good evasive quester. And again, the highest you go in this deck is 5, with Tinkerbell, another evasive, questing for 2 lore. So get some early amber questers down, control the board the best you can, and have a nice full hand of cards ready to play out as many of the higher end 4-costed and 5-costed characters as you are able to. In this format currently, you don't really have to worry about any sort of board wipe, so you can go as wide as you can with this one and quest for the win. So there you go, a little overview of what Poorcana is, or Street Rat, or Lorcommon, or whatever you want to call it. Playing Lorcana with just commons and uncommons as a way to make decks accessible and affordable and also just a fun deck building challenge to see how much power you can squeeze out of those 60 cards when you don't have the big hitters that we are relying on in regular Constructed. I would love to know your thoughts on this one. Please let me know in the comments if this is something you have done. Are you calling it something else? Are you using different limitations to how you can build your deck? I would love to know. Nobody's right on this. Nobody's the owner of this. It's going to organically build until enough people settle on one type. And if this is all completely new to you, are you going to have a go? Is this something you think you might be interested in doing? Either way, let's get a conversation going down below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Until the next one, be good.